Welcome to the Six Conditions podcast, where we explore the science and art of great teams. Join show hosts Drs. Ruth Wagaman and Krister Lowe for pithy summaries of great research being done on teams and organizations, as well as inspired and artful approaches for using those ideas to enable brilliant collaborations. Let's get today's conversation started.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 11 of the Six Conditions podcast, where we're exploring the science and art of great teams. Hey, Ruth, good morning. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership and authority structures. How are you?
I'm doing well, Krister. How are you today?
Great. Well, this is a topic that I've learned a tremendous amount from you, and happy to share some of my quality failures around dealing with leadership and authority structures in teams. Anyways, I'm much gratitude and appreciate to you and to Richard for some of the great work you've done in this area. So I think the listeners are going to find this really valuable. So the title of this episode is Leadership and Authority Structures in Teams. Where does great team leadership come from? But before we dive into that, what's on your mind, Ruth, whether it's related to this topic or just the work you've been doing these days out in the wilds with the teams?
Well, yeah. I was thinking about a particular team where this issue is extremely relevant. What's the authority structure, and what does that suggest about working with the team as a whole to help them develop versus working one-on-one with the team leaders? And I chose in this case to do a lot of coaching of the team leaders in a rhythm that helped them prepare in advance for each of the team's meetings. And that was because this is a brand new team. And what I wanted to do was to help the team's leaders develop confidence and authority in the way that they led the team. And so rather than having me there working with the team as a facilitator, owning the process, I was working behind the scenes to work with the team leader and to help them not to take authority away from the team, but rather to step up into a team coaching role that allows them to elicit the best of teams.
Yeah. Love that. What's coming to my mind is that quote, there's a lot of leaders, but there's very little leadership out there. And I think, it's hard being a leader, carrying that responsibility for the team and just having a place or somebody in your corner where you can come and take your armor off and, really think about how do you step in and really lead more effectively. And that's something we'll talk about, because I know a lot of the work we do around team purpose, oftentimes our initial instincts might be to do some kind of consensus building exercise with the team. But oftentimes this is an important area where leaders sometimes abdicate too much of their authority in their role and really coming in with a clear sense, at least in their view, where they think the team is headed. Doesn't, exclude the team from giving some feedback around that, but that's an area we oftentimes find ourselves doing some work around this issue with teams.
I think that's a great point that you raise, both about leadership being challenging and leaders needing to know when to step up. I think about it as an authority balance beam. You have to kind of walk the middle, and you can fall off in either direction, either by not stepping in when the team needs you to, or by stepping in too much and thereby not giving them the room to do what they're able to.
Yeah. Well, this is good stuff. I mean, this is a topic I kind of feel like is alive and well in every team, right? Because authority is one of the big things that's going on, a psychological process in groups, and whether it's more centralized or decentralized or distributed. I think what's coming to my mind around this is really the work I've been trying to do with teams around is really understanding what is the leader's expectations around authority structure and the teams. And oftentimes when I surface that, in a safe way, they have different expectations. Oftentimes the teams are expecting more of a leader-led structure and more authority from the leader, and the leader's wanting to have more of a shared or distributed leadership. And I guess the way I've been thinking about that is really the developmental arc of a team, that oftentimes at the beginning stage of a team, whether it's a new team or a rebooted team, there's a real need for leadership. And whether that comes from the leader or us as coaches, helping them really get clear about the trajectory of the team. I find that's a time when having a leader-led team and some strong direction really can help. As the team gets more mature, they get more settled in their norms. Oftentimes the authority can become more distributed. So I've been thinking more just around the maturity curve of teams, and how do authority structures help or hurt the team depending on where they are developmentally. So that's something that's been on my mind a lot. And like you, I've done a bit of the behind the scenes coaching of team leaders to coach their own teams rather than me coming in. That's a little bit more the exception than the norm for me lately, but I've been doing a bit of that. And, I do find team leaders are really receptive to the idea of how do I shift to becoming more of a coach to my team rather than just, somebody again who leads through one-on-one micromanagement or, a little more hands-on type of style of management.
Well, that observation you just shared about the question of how do I become more of a coach to my team is actually one of the questions that got me interested in the science of team authority structures. Way back when I was doing my dissertation, I was studying teams that had been reorganized from really an individualistic job to self-managing teams. And what that meant was that the decisions about how the work gets done, the timing, the sequencing, who takes care of which customer, all of these questions now belong to the team rather than to either individual service technicians or to the manager. And this made an important shift for the frontline managers, because the question was not, how do I supervise each of these individuals? It was, how do I build the self-managing capacity of these teams and become more of a coach? And a lot of my forays into this particular study is what actually led me to focus ultimately a lot more on structure and on designing the teams right in the first place and less on coaching. But it also reminded me that teams can exist in organizations with very different authority structures. You can be in what we call a very manager-led or leader-led team, where the team really has no authority to do anything other than execute the work. And then a slightly more authoritative team is the self-managing team, where they can make decisions about how to go about doing the work. But everything else really is a decision belonging to management. Then more advanced still is what we call a self-designing team. And these are teams that not only decide how to do their work, but they also have some authority over, for example, who are the team members and what resources do they have to draw upon and how do they define the work that they're doing together. And then most authoritative of all are teams that we call self-governing. They're teams that have the right to decide their own purposes, or whether we even really need a team at all. And in fact, a lot of the work that I've been doing the last bunch of years has been with self-governing teams that form for purposes that they care about passionately and are trying to figure out how to be effective teams together. But these 4 different authority structures, leader-led, self-managing, self-designing, self-governing, have, I think, really important implications for how we work with teams. So for example, a lot of the leadership teams that I have dealt with are really very leader-led. And the team members themselves have very little authority to determine much about how the team operates. It's really all in the hands of the chief executive, for better or for worse, which means where you have most of your leverage to help the team's effectiveness is in your interactions and coaching of the team leader.
Yeah. No, just triggering for me, one of the senior leaders of a major bank, I was coaching the CEO. He was really frustrated that the team members were not, collaborating more with each other, and always would come to him with issues about, the other team members, the conflicts and such. And, again, when we dug into it, he was leading in a very leader-led way, again, through one-on-ones, which I've mentioned on some of the other episodes. So, one of the big things for him was how much of that did he still want to do? Because those one-on-ones were really valuable, but they were also coming at the consequence of the team not really becoming as self-managing as he needed them to be, because they were actually a large team of 15 people. And there's no way that he could spend, have 15 direct reports and, spend all that time one-on-one with the team members. As valuable as that time was, he was needed to do other boundary spanning kinds of things. So anyways, I think that the authority matrix and really just helping leaders and teams think about, and what I like about the authority matrix is that all of them are good. And in our rush to move to flatter, more decentralized teams, I'm afraid that we're throwing a little bit of the baby out with the bathwater, that actually there may be times when a leader-led team is the right structure. And, maybe as the team unfolds and gets into more rhythms, they might be more able to move towards more self-managing and to distribute some of the authority more, without the leader having to abdicate full, authority or their role, right? So there's times when the formal role of the leader is still needed, especially, I think you highlighted this in our last episode. There are times when the team really needs leadership. And rather than the team just sitting around spinning wheels, not being able to make a decision, that's a great time when a leader needs to step out of a coaching role and become a bit more directive and, help the team kind of get through those impasses. So that's the thing I work with a lot of the leaders on, is when the team needs leadership, being able to sense it and to step in and provide it. And then when they don't, then have a light hand. And, if they're able to drive and moving forward, then just get out of their way, and you can be more of a coach at those moments, right?
So you said something earlier that I'm curious about how the idea of authority structures and talking about this together with me has affected your coaching and explains to you how you got into some trouble in previous cases. So I'm curious, how does this idea of authority structure help you coach now, or how does it help you make sense of some things you've encountered?
Well, some of this a little bit, I come from a Scandinavian background where authority tends to be pretty flat, and there's so I think I've had issues with authority, growing up throughout my life, because I saw in my family modeled a very kind of egalitarian kind of values around it.
Right.
So I've always spoken up to people in positions of authority and all that. But when I first got involved in team coaching, I think I would bypass the leaders as quickly as possible and really try to get to coaching the team as a whole. And I found myself in a few situations where me and the team were having a great, flow together, but the team leader was getting a little bit left on the sidelines. I mean, I brought a different set of skills in facilitation, so I might have been more nimble and agile with the team around processes. So I think there was a little bit of like, who's the leader here? I have a couple of quality failure stories where, in 2-day retreats with teams, the team and me, we were just really humming and flowing, and I would bring the leader on for some certain cameo moments to really make his or her plug. And they would end up laying waste to the whole thing because they didn't like what was going on.
Because that was their moment that they could actually put a stop to some things. Yeah,
exactly. But I think they would sabotage it because, they had already been undermined. And so anyways, I just learned some hard lessons around. Now I've kind of flipped the script a bit, where I spent a lot of time up front building rapport, building a good relationship with the team leaders, and seeing the team leader as my partner. This is one of my painful lessons, being a team coach is, I always want to get to the work with the team, but there are these important stakeholders like the leader or the HR partners or, organizational effectiveness folks that I really have to see them as partners. And in creating a partnership kind of ethos, then we don't get out of sync with each other. And again, if my role is to help empower the leader and the team to ultimately be self-coaching, it's important for me as the team coach, to modulate, or as a consultant to the team, modulate how much of the directiveness I'm bringing, right? So I think I've just become much more mindful over time to respect the authority structure, to make it more transparent, because I think there's a lot of tension around authority in groups that is never really surfaced. And so, this is a great area to do some both design work, but also in the emergent coaching of the team, to be paying attention to how authority is being used in helpful or unhelpful ways.
Well, let me do something to just directly connect this idea to the 6 conditions framework and share some thinking about how the 6 conditions can help you as a team coach make some good choices about what you work with the team around, and the leader and HR professionals. So getting back to the 6 conditions, there is the fundamental, is it a real team, bounded, stable, interdependent? How compelling is the purpose, and are the right people around the table? In a self-managing team, for example, that only has the authority to decide how they go about doing the work, the team doesn't hold any leadership functions. They don't have any authority over the right people, who are the people around the table. They don't have any authority over what is the purpose that we're working toward. And so to engage the team in a conversation that suggests to them that they're going to have authority over that, or to bypass the leader
Right.
and to go directly to the team with those questions is both undermining the team leader's authority and is also setting up the team itself to fail. So, I mean, this gets me to this, the idea of a functional perspective on leadership. And the idea is that there are certain leadership functions that have to be fulfilled for any team to be effective. So deciding the purpose, deciding who's at the table, making decisions about how the work gets done. All those are critical leadership functions that have to be fulfilled in any team. But who is best able to do that is different from team to team. So you mentioned HR professionals, and I feel your pain. I know what you mean about times when it felt like the HR partner was actually a barrier to getting to the team leader. But in fact, HR partners are often uniquely positioned to be the sounding board around purpose, or to be someone who can actually influence the organizational context, which is one of the enablers. And they have critical leadership functions that they can
and
fulfill.
Composition also, right? They're involved in selection and
for a focal team. So I just wanted to help our listeners with this idea of a functional model of leadership, and then just looking at the 6 conditions and saying, well, who commissioned this team and is best able to articulate the purpose and to grapple with the purpose with the team? Like who has the authority to compose or shift the composition of the team, and how do I best work with that person or with the team as a whole in order to improve that aspect of the team's design?
Yeah, I love this idea. And I know there's a great quote from Richard on this, and I think from you as well, just that, leadership has its most influence in putting in place the 6 conditions. And, your idea of a leadership as a function of a team that can be taken up either by the team leader, by the members themselves, or, others. I love that idea. So it's not a fixed thing that has to just exist, but teams need leadership. And really, the big levers are putting in place those 6 conditions. After that, the other interventions tend to have less influence, right? Because it goes back to the idea of structure driving behavior. So that's where leaders, if they spend a bit more time focusing there, it should free them up to help their teams get off on a good trajectory and not spend so much time dealing with interpersonal conflicts or, consequences of poor team design.
That's a really good point that you raise there. I've often, in working with leaders like you, felt their frustration at an inability to make a difference in what feel to them like dysfunctional dynamics, and the team not stepping up and never really getting traction on its work. And they're either giving up or they're continuing to try to work the process to often like to coach one-on-one. And they don't recognize that that much of that is being driven by inattention to certain design features in the first place. And that this idea of freeing themselves up and giving themselves room, but also giving the team to take up much more of its space and its ability to work together, their real point of leverage lies in getting those structural things in place. And then they are freer to give the team room and just to coach the team.
Yeah. There's another thing I want to throw in there that I have found helpful just around balancing out some authority dynamics. I mean, one of the techniques I think I've already alluded to a little bit is surfacing the authority structure, what it should be in the team, and doing a bit of design work around that. There's another one around creating norms under sound structure with the team, around what are the team's norms for winning and accomplishing what they're trying to do together. I also like to do team leader norms. So what is it that you're needing of the team leader, and the team leader, what is it that you're needing of the team? And again, I think just making that stuff explicit really helps with a lot of under the surface kind of tensions and, oftentimes frustrations that never really get channeled in the proper direction. One other thing I wanted to say, though, another tool is that a lot of authority, if you think about it, actually exists in the stakeholders that the team has been created to create value for. And so one of the ways to help balance out some things is to really get stakeholders into the room. And that oftentimes creates like a superordinate goal for both the team leader and the team to focus on. Because at the end of the day, if the customers aren't happy with what it is we're creating for them, we cease to exist. And so I just like to put that out there because I find sometimes creating a bit of a focus on the customers and the stakeholders we're creating oftentimes can help the team get over authority issues and start to have a common, a focus in addition to their purpose, really engaging their customers and in partnership, I think also helps a bit around some of the authority stuff. So just wanted to throw that out there too.
Yeah, I think that's, it takes me back to the functional model of leadership, which is, that it's not a focus on leaders or on who is the leader, but it rather says, what are the critical leadership functions that need to be fulfilled in order for this team to be successful? Which ones aren't getting fulfilled,
Right.
and who can do that? And I think the point that you're raising about stakeholders is really pointing to that sort of orienting function that a compelling purpose has. Orienting, the clarity and consequentiality of a purpose are both affected by directly engaging with your stakeholders and what they need of you.
Yeah. But a sign of a mature team for me is when they've got their internal flow going and dynamics such that they actually have the bandwidth to focus on outward facing where they're creating value, right? And that's a journey for teams. So that's usually a good sign that, when they're able to focus externally, that maybe the authority structures are hopefully in good place because they're not, getting into too much conflict around that or, miscommunication. But, Ruth, in the team diagnostic survey, there's a whole bunch of things in the supplemental part of that. We have the core measurement of the main model, the 6 conditions, the 3 key task processes, and the team effectiveness outcomes. But there's some really great stuff in the supplemental material of the report that I feel like touches on this issue of authority structure. So one of them that's coming to my mind is how well the team's purpose has been specified. And so it looks at, are the ends specified as well as the means to get there? And one of the things you're wanting to see is that the team has a really clear sense of what the end states are, but that they have a lot of latitude around the means. Now, what I'm oftentimes finding in teams is some people feel that way, but others are finding that they have a lot of latitude around the means, but they actually don't know what the end state is. And we call that the risk of anarchy, right? So the first, it's a four box model. So you have engage goal directed work where ends are specified, means are not. You have where means are not specified, so there's latitude, but the end states aren't. That's risk of anarchy. And then you've got 2 other boxes around micromanagement where both the means and the ends are specified. And then, where the what's the last one? It's around micromanagement.
Demotivation. Demotivation where the all the means are specified, but nobody knows what the purpose is, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, I think that's a useful framework when working with team leaders, because it also really helps leaders get a sense of, where is the team? And oftentimes that could lead to some clues about whether they're micromanaging or are they not providing enough sense of direction. So,
and actually that particular 2x2, that risk of anarchy box, that is where self-governing teams tend to wind up, because when the function of specifying purpose belongs to the team, like we decided we wanted a team to fix this really important problem in our community and we want to tackle this together. Teams are not actually really great at clarity of purpose. Individuals are much better at that than teams are. And so you can see teams that are really well-intentioned, but really fragmented because they haven't done the purpose work together to really nail down precisely what it is that they're working toward. And that often is job one when we're working with self-governing teams.
Yeah. Love that. And so that, that 2x2, I think is great. The authority matrix, which you've spoken about, is it a leader-led team, self-managing, self-designing and self-governing, also great. There's also a piece in there around the kinds of coaching leaders bring to the team. And some of those are they giving enough task-focused coaching? Another one around, are they doing enough around rewards and recognition or reinforcing good behavior of the team? That one, oftentimes we're seeing leaders not doing enough of. Engaging in interpersonal coaching, a lot of times we find leaders doing too much of that. So we actually want to see moderate or low amounts of that, but that's usually a sign that there might be some issues around, the 6 conditions that are not in place. And the final one is really around unhelpful interventions where there's a lot of advice giving.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that also useful in the supplemental material of the team diagnostic survey to really can be helpful for leaders to gauge a bit about where they might be showing up well as leaders, but also where the team may need some shifts in their style and approach, right, to leading and using authority appropriately.
Yeah, I've found that kind of feedback about the balance of where they're spending their energy in coaching their team to be kind of a breakthrough insight for a lot of team members. So one contrast, for example, you mentioned not focusing much of your energy on reinforcing good behavior or providing positive feedback,
Yeah.
but putting a lot of energy into correcting the team when
Right.
it does something wrong. That's getting the balance in
Yeah.
the opposite direction that it should be, and it's not building the team's self-coaching and efficacy capacity. But the other one that you pointed out was, task focused process coaching, helping them do better strategy, focus on learning, become engaged and motivated, all very appropriate, great uses of leader coaching. But we do see a lot of leaders get distracted by the interpersonal thing. And that is often a sign that some fundamentals aren't in good shape. And as a consequence, you're getting some conflicts and turf battles and disagreements over what's appropriate behavior arising because those have never been really fully settled in the team.
Yeah. Just another thing to add here, as we kind of start to come to the back part of this episode, one of the things I'm noticing with a number of the teams I'm working with around authority structures is that who the team has been and the leader has been really helpful to get them to where they are today, but it may be insufficient to get them to where they need to be.
Yeah.
And so I think this is an area where team leaders having a coach or somebody that they can speak to where they can take their armor off, they don't have to be in performance mode. They can really just talk a little bit about where the team is and its growth, where they are as a leader and what kind of shifts they need to make. Because, under pressure, we will default to our deeply ingrained habitual styles and ways of being. And anyways, I'm just finding that something that team leaders are finding just useful to have a place to talk about that, just to zoom out to the balcony and say, where is my team now? What is it that they're needing from me? What's similar? What's different? And, doing that, I think, can create some helpful shifts around how leadership and authority needs can be changing in the life of a team and, along with the business cycle, right? Where they are in their business cycle.
Exactly. And I think that it can go in both directions. You can have a team, as you had described earlier, that is new and novices and rather dependent on the leader, and they can be on a trajectory of becoming increasingly independent over time. So they're taking on more leadership functions. But I have also seen many entrepreneurial startup teams where they start with a very egalitarian structure. We're all in this together. We're building something new. We're kind of family and friends. But as the organization evolves and grows and becomes more complex, it may need more layers of authority rather than just everybody sitting around the table and trying to drive to consensus. So your point about having these explicit conversations with the leader and the team about what authority structure would benefit us now in this stage of development in, given our collective purposes is a really fruitful conversation to have.
Yeah. Well, great stuff, Ruth. What else is percolating out there for you on this topic, or have we boiled the ocean enough for today on authority structures?
I think for the moment, I would just point our listeners to some resources if they want to explore this idea a little bit further. In the Senior Leadership Teams book, Richard and I and Deb and Jim talk about certain critical leadership functions that really need to belong to the leader and cannot be done well by the team. You and I also in our handbook chapter on team coaching talk through this authority structure idea and what implications it has for, how and when you work with teams versus leaders. And then for scholars who are interested in research on this, Colin Fisher and I wrote a chapter aimed at researchers that is really about the particular challenges and opportunities of different team authority structures. So some additional resources for people who want to dig in and read deeper, and you can find these on our website.
Yeah. I also, it's ringing a bell for me is Richard's book on leading teams, setting the stage for great performances. And I've heard you mention that you think it's one of the best books on leadership,
I
right?
do.
That's out
Yeah.
there. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think for listeners out there who are team leaders, that, I think team coaches also could benefit, and team members, but for team leaders in particular, that's a real deep dive in some of this the psychology underlying the 6 conditions framework. And
Yes,
really,
absolutely.
yeah.
And you can
But,
find links to all of these
yeah.
on our website, 16conditions.com.
Great. Well, Ruth, over the last, 10, 11 episodes, we have really launched this podcast. We've kind of laid out the main conceptual components of the architecture of the 6 conditions framework and the team diagnostic survey. And, we're thinking now, before we move on to new content and introducing new concepts, that we would pause a little bit and start to bring on some practitioners and highlight some applications of the framework with real world teams. So in the next upcoming episodes, we are going to bring on some guests onto the show. I think the listeners are going to find that really interesting, and really look at how we bring the 6 conditions framework and team diagnostic survey to life in the field with real teams, and start to bring some of those voices on. And then, after a few episodes of that, we'll pick it up and again re-engage with some new ideas of the science and art of great teams. So anything to share in closing here, Ruth, before we say goodbye to the listeners? And we'll
affirming. I think that's going to be a great idea. Even though you and I have plenty of stories to tell, there are many more, many more stories and illustrations out there that I think will help bring this 6 conditions thinking to life, and show for a whole variety of different kinds of teams and contexts how this can really develop brilliant collaboration.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to that. And so everyone, hope you found some value in today's episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the 6 Conditions podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. For show notes, links to great resources mentioned in the podcast, and for more information, go to 16conditions.com. See you next time on the 6 Conditions podcast.